Welcome to this oral evidence session of the Welsh Affairs Select Committee. My name is Ruth Jones and I'm the chair of the committee. I'm very pleased to be able to introduce our first session into our inquiry in prisons, probation and rehabilitation in Wales. From our first panel this afternoon, we'll be hearing from scrutiny bodies who are responsible for monitoring conditions within prisons and the welfare of those held in prisons. And then we will have our second panel featuring trade unions that represent staff working in the prisons and probation service in Wales. And I should say it's quite warm in here today, so if members or witnesses would like to remove their jackets, please feel free to do so. Before I begin our first session, I should ask any members of the committee to declare any interests that are relevant to today's session. No? I think we'll carry on then, that's fine. So let me say welcome to you both, Charlie Taylor and Elizabeth Davis. Thank you very much for coming and appearing in person before us this afternoon. It's so helpful when people come in person. It's really, really appreciated. So can I ask you to briefly introduce yourselves and explain the role of your organisations in monitoring prisons? Shall I start with Mr. Taylor?
Yes, my name's Charlie Taylor. I'm His Majesty's Chief Inspector of Prisons for England and Wales. And our role is to report on the treatment of conditions and outcomes for prisoners across the 123 prisons across the two countries. And also we do immigration detention, military detention and court custody as well.
Thank you. Ms Davis.
Thank you very much. So I'm Elizabeth Davis. I'm the National Chair of the Independent Monitoring Boards. Independent Monitoring Boards, or IMBs, monitor prison and young offender institutions across England and Wales. And they monitor immigration detention facilities, including chartered flight removals across the UK. So that's about 141 IMBs in all, Independent Monitoring Boards. 1,200 members. They're comprised of unpaid public appointees. They're drawn from the local community, often referred to as the eyes and ears of the local community. We work quite closely with HMIP, Mr. Taylor, and his inspectors. We play a crucial part, obviously, in the independent oversight of places of detention. Last year, members made just over 35,000 visits. So if you're kind of thinking about the difference between IMB members, Independent Monitoring Board members, and inspectors, that's probably worth reflecting on the fact that, so what are we talking? IMB members are probably in and out of prisons on a weekly basis. That's quite different to members of the Prisons Inspectorate, for example. But their regular presence obviously matters hugely in terms of preventing ill treatment. Sorry, Chair, I'm aware I'm interrupting you there.
That's fine. No, you haven't interrupted at all. I'm just wondering, because obviously you said you work closely together, and I'm just wondering, is there any way that the collaboration between you could be improved, or is there anything that's a barrier to blocking it? Let's start with Mr.
I think the fact we have offices that are directly next door to each other means that I think the collaboration is very good. So we always will seek... we have a memorandum of understanding, so we have informal meetings regularly and talk to each other around the office, but also we have a memorandum of understanding between the two organisations, which means that we will always read IMB reports before we come in, but also we'll always consult the chair of the IMB when we go to inspect a prison, and the information that we get from the IMB is incredibly helpful as evidence that we can use as part of the inspection.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's just that commitment to triangulating the data, if you like. So there is that commitment to sharing the support, sharing the learning. That's what the commitment exists to do. And whether that's happening informally or whether that's happening formally in the prison context, that is happening.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. I'm going to pass over to David Chadwick, please.
Good afternoon, Pnawn Da. Our predecessor Welsh Affairs Committee ran an inquiry into prisons in 2024. Since then, clearly there's been a change in government, and the capacity crisis has continued to mount significant operational challenges. What are the most significant challenges facing the Welsh prison estate today, and have they evolved over the last year?
Shall I start us off, Charlie? Because one of the primary issues is, unsurprisingly, population pressures, and you've just alluded to it there. I would say that England and Wales are equally impacted by population pressures, but there are some specific concerns raised by Welsh IMBs. So we've got an increase in out-of-area prisoners arriving at Swansea Prison, for example, where they're having a destabilising effect. So these arrivals tend to be later in the day. They're negatively impacting the reception processes. And the prison has seen an increase in self-harm, violence and substance misuse rates have increased as a result. At Usk and Prescoed, we're seeing prisoners who've arrived and they're not ready for open conditions. They're not kind of expecting open conditions, or they're misinterpreting what to expect with regard to open conditions. So if I just give you an example, we're talking to one prisoner who's expecting to see their family and working in the community soon after arrival into open conditions, whereas in reality that takes about 20 weeks. So there's a mismatch in terms of their expectations. Staffing issues, I talked briefly about population pressures, but staffing issues are a general concern of Welsh IMBs as well. But again, I would say that that's not unique to Wales. Most boards report concern with staffing levels and inexperience, particularly at Berwyn in North Wales. Where in January 2024, over 40% of the Band 3 prison officers. Now, the Band 3 prison officers are the officers who have supervisory responsibilities, but over 40% of the Band 3 officers had been in Berwyn less than 12 months in January 2024. So it's a very real issue in terms of the staffing issue. Access to illicit items as well, that's a concern that IMBs are raising as well. I don't know if you want to pick up on anything there, Charlie, but population pressures, staffing concerns and access to illicit items, I would say those are the big three.
Just to follow up on what you mentioned there, because you mentioned January 2024, and the second half of the question was how have the issues evolved since last year? Can you answer that part of the question?
Yeah, so I would say the issues have remained pretty much the same because these are not new issues. So if you speak to IMB members, for example, they will feel that they have been raising these issues consistently, time and time again, for example, in annual reports over a number of years.
Just to add to that, I would say that the difference probably that we've seen has been the increasing ingress of drugs using drones to get contraband into prisons. And we're seeing that as something that has become much more common. Serious organised crimes are making a huge amount of money, bringing, with very big markups, being able to fly drones in and out very quickly. They're often hard to detect. The technology they use is often a step ahead of the technology that the prison service has. And also there are unique vulnerabilities in certain prisons. So, for example, Park currently has a programme to replace its windows to make them more defendable. But currently the windows at Park can be very easily breached by drone ingress, and that's one of the reasons why drug use at that prison has become such a concern. But in terms of Elizabeth's other point, population pressures, absolutely, particularly affecting Swansea and Cardiff. And Berwyn as well, which is now taking a population from the northwest of England as well as, or a remand population from the northwest of England as well as it was originally designed for a small remand population from Wales and then a larger Category C population from the northwest of England and from North Wales. And then finally, the issue of staffing. The last thing I just mentioned is lack of purposeful activities, so prisoners not having enough to do with their time. And actually some of the scores in Welsh prisons are actually slightly better than they are in prisons in England for our purposeful activity score. So us and our colleagues at Estyn will give a rating for prisons in Wales. But things are slightly better, I would say, on that front in Wales, but they're not nearly good enough. So prisoners are not doing enough of the sorts of activities that the public would expect them to be doing, working, training, education, which will make them less likely to reoffend when they come out.
I'm sure we will return to purposeful activity in a minute. Andrew Ranger, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both for coming. This is probably expanding a little bit on what you've already touched on. How, to both of you, how are prisons in Wales performing when compared against equivalent prisons in the English estate? If I start with Ms Davis, please.
I would suggest that broadly we are seeing parallels across the English and the Welsh estate, which I talked about there in terms of the population pressures, the staffing pressures, the illicit items. I don't think there's any real difference to highlight. We're seeing some issues which I've talked about, which relate to specific areas out of area issues, but I don't think it's. What we're seeing is there might be a difference across different categories, but we're not seeing a difference across different parts of England, different parts of Wales.
Thank you. Anything to add, Mr. Taylor?
Yeah, I mean, I would say when we inspect prisons, we inspect them against our expectations, and included in our expectations are our 4 healthy prison assessments. So we assess prisons for the levels of safety, for respect, which includes things like staff-prisoner relationships, healthcare, those sorts of things. We inspect for purposeful activity, and we inspect for preparation for release. And we give them a score of 1 for poor and 4 for good, reasonably good is a 3, and not sufficiently good is a 2. And I would say generally, particularly in our scores of safety, Welsh prisons are performing slightly better than those prisons in England. So they are a little bit safer, in our view, than prisons in England, notwithstanding the fact that Park recently, at our recent inspection, has deteriorated quite significantly. But Swansea Park Young Offenders Institution, Askham Prescoed and Askham Prescoed all scored a 4 for safety, so they're all rated as good for safety. But also Cardiff scored a 3 for safety as well. So a 3 and a 4 for the 2 local prisons or reception prisons in Wales, Cardiff and Swansea, is really good and much better than we see in most prisons over in England. So I would also say that our scores for purposeful activity, again, are slightly better, as I said, than we're seeing in England. But many of the challenges that are faced by English prisons are also very similar to those faced by Welsh jails.
Just interestingly, do you think there is an identifiable reason for that in terms of what you've just said?
It's always hard to put your finger on some of those comparators, but I would say a couple of things. I would say the leadership, particularly at Swansea and Cardiff, has been really strong in recent years and also more consistent. So that has helped a lot. Actually, prior to our previous inspection, the leadership at Park had also been consistent, so they've been a leader, I think, in place for about 13 years. That makes a real difference to prisons. I also think some of the most acute difficulties with retention are not faced by some Welsh prisons, so the prisons in the south of Wales, where they appear to do a better job of hanging on to staff. But I think that's partly because they're reasonably safe places, which means that they're good places to work. So there is a sort of positive cycle that places like Cardiff and Swansea are in, that if you just crossed over the border to, say, Bristol, has been far more of a challenge. Berwyn is another case because in terms of staffing up there, it's always been a challenge to have enough staff in that jail. Actually, I was there a couple of weeks ago, and they are just about up to their full complement. So there is an improvement there. But I think it will remain a challenge given Berwyn's location in terms of always having enough staff there. But I would say it's the quality of leadership and retention of staff that are probably the 2 biggest factors. And also some kind of cultural strengths about, for example, Swansea is a Swansea prison for people from South Wales. And there is a sense of community about that prison and about Cardiff that perhaps you don't always get in more kind of dissipated disparate bits of England.
Yeah, that's really interesting, thank you. I just wanted to look at the women's offender population, women's prisons. So how does the performance of Eastwood Park and Styles, so prisons in England, where the majority of Welsh women offenders end up, compare with the rest of the women's estate? Start with Mr. Taylor, if that's okay. Yeah.
In those 2 jails, we've got considerable concerns. So Eastwood Park we haven't been to for a little bit, but we were there 2 years ago, and we were very critical about what was going on in Eastwood Park, particularly the care levels for some of the most vulnerable women. We recently inspected Style, and we had some similar concerns there. Our safety score at Style was only a 2, which is unusual in a women's prisons. Usually they tend to be safer than men's jails. So there remain some ongoing concerns at those 2 prisons, and certainly they are probably 2 of the 3 prisons, the women's prisons across England, that are performing the least well. Part of the challenge that they face is actually that their population is coming from a long way away. So if you're sent to prison from the southwest of Wales, you will end up in Eastwood Park, which is a long way for family and friends to stay in touch. And we recently did a thematic report, which I commend to the committee, called Time to Care, which was about looking into what are the things that help women cope best of all in prison. And one of the things was about being able to keep close ties with family members, which are critically important, particularly with children. And what we found was that women's prisons weren't as creative or imaginative about making those visits a much more positive experience than we'd seen actually in some of the men's prisons. So some work to be done for the prison service there.
Thank you. Davis?
I mean, I would just go back to what lies behind your question, because I think it's really important to acknowledge that there is, as of yet, no women's facility in Wales, and all women are being detained. That means, as Charlie Taylor was saying, far from their home, their families, and potentially from their children. The impact of this on Welsh women cannot be understated, and it is the most significant difference compared to Welsh men in prison, I would suggest. However, we do note some positive steps. So in Style, for example, where the PACT, which is the Prison Advice and Care Trust, bring children from Wales to visit their mothers. In Eastwood Park, I would say the most significant issues that the IMB has raised regarding Welsh women's access to services has been around access to healthcare. So, for example, in Eastwood Park, the IMB has reported delays in securing records from GPs in South Wales. So, for example, the prison healthcare team did have direct access to healthcare records, unlike for those registered with GPs in England. Prisoners had to give interim treatments before their medical history and their prescribing history was known. And the same is true in Style. And it's worth reflecting on the numbers that we're talking here, because Style, we're talking about 5%, I think, of the prisoners are Welsh women. In Eastwood Park, it's about 33%. So worth reflecting on that, I would suggest.
Thank you very much. And just a final part of this question to yourself, Ms Davis. To what extent do the findings of the Welsh IMBs align with the findings produced by HMIP? And if there is a disparity, what might be the explanation for that?
I think there isn't a disparity, because it goes back to what we were saying at the beginning. So in advance of a visit by HMIP, I know that HMIP, and we've got this as set out in the Memorandum of Understanding, but for example, the inspectors are looking at the IMB annual reports. They're using that as the trigger for specific areas that require specific areas of inspection. They are talking often to the chair of the IMB, but certainly to a member of the IMB. So that, combined with the more informal recognition that Charlie Taylor and myself are able to give to this issue of triangulating data, I would say that there isn't a disparity, and that often what we're seeing is exactly what the prisons inspector is saying is reflected in the IMB annual report, and vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. We're looking at things through a slightly different lens, and obviously the IMB is monitoring whilst we are actually going in and inspecting. We're in prisons less often than the IMB is. We'll go to places at least every 5 years, but more often if it's a place that we're concerned about. So there is in as much as there is a difference, it's that we're focusing on slightly different things when we're going about our business.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Enley, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both for coming this afternoon. I note that not a single prison in Wales received a score of good for the purposeful activity healthy prison test, and indeed written evidence submitted by His Majesty's Inspector of Prisons to the committee notes that the amount of time that prisoners in Wales were spending out of the cell varied between and within prisons in Wales. Can I just ask initially, what are the more significant factors that might explain this disparity and inconsistency? And then, in addition, what can prison governors do to try and improve the situation? So if I can start with Mr Taylor.
Yes, sorry. Just to say, in terms of Cardiff, our recent inspection, they were reasonably good. So they got a 3 in our inspection. And similarly, Usk and Prescope, we were actually there this week. So we'll see how that inspection goes. But they were also reasonably good as well. So I think in terms of governors, the difficulties that we see in England are that they don't always have leverage over the contracts that are being run in the prison. So they're set centrally from Whitehall. Actually, the arrangements in Wales are slightly different. And actually, in my opinion, I think are more flexible and to some extent are therefore more successful. Now, the scores in Wales aren't great by any stretch of the imagination. This is our lowest scoring healthy prison assessment across the board. And the scores in Wales are lower than they are for other healthy prison assessments. But nevertheless, I think there is a bit more flexibility about the way that the contract is managed in Wales through the area director's office in Wales, which does seem to be able to manage those contracts a little bit more astutely and effectively than sometimes we see in prisons in England, where often the governor has many other priorities and doesn't always have the time or the expertise to be able to really focus on the sort of contract management that is required by the contracts that are let in England. So, sorry, it's a rather sort of technical answer, but I think as a result of that, what we see is that purposeful activity in Wales is a little bit better than what we see in England.
And given then that the situation in Wales allows for greater flexibility with regards to some of the contractors, what are the main factors then that would impact on the ability for more time out of the cell?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. Having enough staff is critical, and having enough staff of enough experience is really critical. Being able to bear down on things like the ingress of drugs, again, makes a difference. If you're dealing with the results of drugs, which is often violent debt, bullying, that you've got prisoners under the influence. Again, that is taking the attention away from officers, which means that people don't get unlocked in a timely fashion as we would expect them to be. Population pressures are also affecting particularly Cardiff and Swansea, where, because as soon as someone has been sentenced, where in the past if they had a short sentence, they would have stuck around in the prison for a bit, and if it was a very short sentence, completed their sentence there. There is such pressure across prisons in England and Wales that actually people get shipped out almost immediately that they're sentenced, which means they're having a move and they're going somewhere else, sometimes only for a matter of a few weeks or months. So that just adds to the churn. So the turnover of population, particularly in Cardiff, Swansea, and to some extent in Bowen as well, is having an effect on the prison's ability to be able to really deliver purposeful activity. And then finally, just in terms of space, I mean, for an inner-city prison, actually, Cardiff is a relatively spacious site. But nevertheless, for the number of men that it currently holds, and similarly at Wandsworth, it is difficult to find enough activity for them to do, even if you have the staff to unlock them, to get them to activity in the first place.
Thank you, that's very useful. And is there a sort of an ideal amount of time that you'd like to see prisoners out of their cells doing activity?
We in our expectations, we have a minimum of 10 hours a day. It's something that we rarely see in prisons in Wales or in England. I would say a notable exception in Wales actually is Park YOI, where they consistently get children out of their cells for up to 10 hours a day, and sometimes 12 hours a day in some cases. So I would say as a closed prison, it's one of the best performing across the estate of England and Wales.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Davis, do you have anything to add?
Well, just with regard to time out of cell, I think it's quite a multifaceted issue, isn't it? Charlie Taylor there has talked about population pressures. I would just say that the staffing issues, that relates to that inability to run consistent and productive regimes. So it's about doing what you said you were going to do. And often if you speak to a prisoner, they would forego time out of cells if they were going to be applied to a consistent regime. They were going to be held to a consistent regime. So as long as they know what to expect, there's that issue. General infrastructure issues as well, which I don't think Charlie Taylor talks so much about. So, for example, Eastwood Park doesn't have a care and separation unit. So that means that segregated women are placed in cells on normal wings, as it were, and consequently you've got other women will need to stay in their cells when those women are being let out. At times, it's what IMB members would refer to as a lack of ambitious leadership as well, which will take me on to the second part of your question. And by that, IMBs often note that an ambitious governor and a motivated and skilled senior management team can make significant improvements. So just what can you expect, what can governors do with regard to time out of cell? 3 things here. They can create a stable and predictable regime. So that speaks to that point that I was saying about if you speak to prisoners, and IMBs frequently do, they get that sense of they would forego time out of their cells as long as they know what is being promised and they're going to be held to that. The second issue is that they could develop a central focus on positive prisoner and staff relationships. So that's about through clear and open communications. That's about through prisoner councils. That's about through newsletters. That's about a functioning and effective key work system as well. And thirdly, they could work creatively with current resources to develop relevant offerings. And the example here I would share is from Swansea. So Swansea has introduced painting and decorating parties of prisoners to help with prison maintenance. And it's introduced a life skills course. And that teaches prisoners absolutely the basics. So that might be how you switch on a washing machine, how you boil an egg. But it's about kind of much of what needs... It doesn't need a lot of resources, it doesn't need a lot of funding to implement it, but it really matters to the prisoners.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's obviously a matter of public record that this committee has been scrutinising HMP Park, especially given the 17 deaths last year. We visited and we've taken oral evidence, and I think one of the questions, the fundamental question is that how concerned should we be? Because we get letters from family members, friends, who are very concerned with their friends and family members who are actually in HMP Park, detailing all sorts of issues and instances of where harm has happened. How concerned should we be then about the safety of these men? Shall I start with Mr. Taylor?
Yes, certainly. I think very concerned. Park has had a pretty good track record as a reasonably safe prison. So in our last 2 inspections prior to the one we did earlier this year, it had scored a 3 for safety, so reasonably good for safety. We found when we returned this time a very big deterioration in safety, and we went from a 3 to a 1. So our lowest score for safety. And that's almost unprecedented. So enormous concerns about what was going on in the prison. And I think there were a number of factors that were a cause of this that I think you would have heard too when at your previous investigation into the jail. They had difficulties with staffing. They had huge issues with ingress of drugs. They had a changeover of contract. And I think also critically they lost a very experienced director and deputy director at a similar time. So they then had a lot of these deaths. They had, sadly, 3 suicides. They've also had a number of non-natural deaths due to drugs. And that also knocked the prison for 6 as well. So this was a jail that people had considerable pride in. People liked working at Park. They were proud of the jail. And I think some of that pride and that real sense of community the jail had been diminished by the absolute catastrophic effect that these deaths had both on staff and on population as well. However, despite our low score, when we did go back to the jail in January, we thought there were some positives there. So there was a little bit more grip by a new director who'd been appointed. The number of deaths had diminished since that shocking high that there'd been earlier last year. The regime wasn't nearly good enough, but there were some reasonably credible plans to get prisoners out and about and doing some of the things that in the past we commented on reasonably positively. And also there was a sense amongst the leadership team and also amongst officers that morale was beginning to improve. So there were some green shoots, but I wouldn't want to give you a false assurance on that. We will be back at Park within the year, and we'll want to see that those improvements that we've begun to see have been sustained, but there is a long way to go.
And I mean, obviously, the latest report we've read, and it shows a stark deterioration since 2022.
Indeed.
And obviously, the previous committee, the iteration before the general election, was concerned then, and the concerns have not diminished at all. So, obviously, you've talked about G4S addressing these issues. How confident you are that, given the latest report, it's gone down dramatically in 3 areas. How confident you are that they can actually turn the ship around?
We have reasonable confidence. I think with the experienced director that they've got in, who has a good track record elsewhere, there is a sense that things are beginning to improve. There's also a programme that the prison service is supporting, which is to replace the windows at Park. And I think ultimately we won't get the level of stability that we want at Park until the security on the gate has got better, and also that particularly with things like searching staff, but also that the protection against drones can be improved in the jail as well. And while that happens, it continues to be difficult to defend that jail against drones, which are coming in and out very quickly. So we didn't want to go as far as reassuring you that everything is all right. We absolutely wouldn't want to do that. We're very worried about Park, but we're a bit less worried than I think we would have been had we been there 6 months before.
Okay, thank you. Ms Davis, in terms of IMB, obviously you talked about the thousands of visits that go on across the UK to various prisons, but last year the IMB at HMP Park was unable to produce an annual report.
Yeah, so the annual report for 23-24, that will be published imminently, and the committee will be sent a copy of the report. Park there's no doubt in my mind, it's had a very difficult year, and of course there is real concern about the levels of death that have occurred recently. However, in the annual report, which, as I say, is due to be published in the coming week, the board is of the opinion that the new director and team are actively confronting the issues and have begun implementing the necessary changes to improve safety. So it's very much the green shoots that Charlie Taylor alluded to. There have been resourcing issues facing the Park board. So if I just share all, the Park IMB board at its full complement should be 17. It dipped down to 2 during the time of 23 to 24. That had a severe impact on the board's capacity to monitor. Of course it did. It is important to, if we go back to what I was saying at the beginning, so IMBs, they're made up of unpaid public appointees. They are freely giving their time, and like many voluntary organisations, and they're not volunteers, they're unpaid public appointees, but if you looked at the National Council for Volunteering Organisations, it draws comparisons. It would say, in Wales, you've got real issues with people, they want to become trustees, but they don't want to become the officers of local charities. You've got people who, post-COVID, they want to volunteer, but they want to volunteer on a very ad hoc basis. Or they want to volunteer remotely. They don't want to go into these places. So you can imagine that's creating real issues. The cost of living crisis is also creating real issues as well. And if you think about it, the IMB, I think it has the additional challenge of recognising that this is quite a challenging role. This is not going to be for everyone. I know that.
He said that there are, thousands of these visits going on every year.
Yeah, they're about.
Why is it Park that was unable to produce the annual report in a timely manner compared to, say, the other Welsh prisons?
It's not just Park. So there have been other prisons where the annual report has been delayed, and we have got a real issue in terms of the sustainability of IMBs. And I would suggest, Chair, that one of the things I've been doing is, so certainly there have been all sorts of steps we've taken at Park to mitigate the situation. So we've now got 7 members, which is still far off the complement, but we are moving together And we're coming together to support the Park Board, and that's very much of IMB members from other Welsh prisons, for example, as well as non-Welsh prisons. I can also say that since I became the IMB National Chair, the sustainability of IMBs has been my absolute focus. So we have engaged extensively with IMB members. We're now in a period of testing changes with small advisory groups ahead of a year of change and transformation, which will look at both expectation management and the clustering of a number of IMBs. So it is firmly on the agenda and something is being done with it, but we've obviously got real issues with regard to Park, no doubt about that.
Obviously, as you said earlier, you're the eyes and ears of the inspection. So
we are.
It's an issue, isn't it?
It is, and it's not for everyone. And I would just go back to, if you think about the example I frequently use is, and this might be unfair, but Coffee Morning, Cancer Research UK. Do you want to volunteer and raise money for Cancer Research UK, or do you want to go into a prison, a place of detention locally? And of course the answer might be you want to do the former, not the latter.
And move on to David Chadwick, please.
Thank you, Chair. Prisons, by their very nature, are designed to keep people in. That's a description I'm sure everybody would agree with on a very basic level. And one of the really astonishing revelations has been the fact that they're struggling to keep things out, which implicitly we would all expect prisons to be very capable of doing. So to what extent are the challenges facing HMP Park, particularly the ingress of illegal substances, comparable to the challenges facing other equivalent prisons within the English and Wales estates?
Yes, do.
So I think Park has some real challenges. It's partly, I think, its location, in that it's a kind of semi-rural location, which means that people can drive up a side road, release a drone very quickly. Drones can now be piloted from much further afield, even we've heard potentially from abroad as well, so that someone launches the drone but the actual control of it can be done elsewhere. The accuracy of drones has improved, and there is a unique vulnerability with the windows at Park. However, when compared to other jails in England, it's not uniquely bad. So there are many other prisons that are getting hit very hard by serious organised crime. It's an issue that the prison service faces across the country. Even in some of the long-term high-secure estate, holding some of the most risky men in the country, we're seeing drones are coming into prisons as well. So it is an issue of national concern. It's an issue for the prison service, for police services, and also in some cases for security services as well, to be able to begin to reduce the issue. But I think why drones represent a new paradigm is because the amount of substance they can get in. So in the past, throwing stuff over the fence was dependent on how much you could throw, or staff members bringing things in illegally, or things being passed over in visits, restricted the amount that you could pass over. What we're now seeing is drones with quite big payloads. I think one I heard about recently had an 11-kilo payload. And of course, what that then means is that a very large amount of drugs and mobile phones, which are used to direct activities, can come into a jail with just one drone delivery. So that's why I think it's such an acute problem. Park is not unique in terms of the difficulties that it faces on this front, and only when the windows get fixed will we ultimately be able to stop this threat.
So what do prisons need to stop the threat?
Well, there are a number of things. There are technological solutions which some prisons are beginning to develop, and I think there is scope for that to operate further. But I think it's also about physical security, so it's making sure windows are in the right place, that, for example, there's netting in place of sufficient strength to protect things like exercise yards, that CCTV cameras and ANPR, number plate recognition cameras, are around the environment as well. Coordination with the local police is incredibly important, and where that coordination works well, that is also effective. And then finally, it's about making sure that staff are properly searched as well, and visitors, so that there isn't the risk of corruption. And then finally, it's about having staff who just do the day job well. So, for example, making sure that grass is cut so that packages can't be dropped into grass. into long grass, making sure that rubbish is cleared up, because we've seen packages disguised as rubbish being dropped in at prisons. So it is about staff just being on the case, and security staff being on the case in the prison, making sure that the correct checks are done. And then finally, when a package is identified having been delivered to a specific cell, there's no point in searching that cell the next morning. It needs to be searched within half an hour. Otherwise, whatever came in will be dispersed around the prison by the time that door has been opened. So having people available to search cells at night as well is critical.
Mr Chadwick, I would just add to that, the availability of drugs and illicit items is often one of the main concerns of most IMBs. So I would say this is certainly not unique to Park. However, many of the deaths are still being investigated either by the Prison and Probation Ombudsman or through the local coroner, and you need to reassurance that we will monitor the outcomes of the processes, and I'm sure both Charlie Taylor and myself will be doing just that.
And Davis, please.
Thank you. Well, I've been to Park, I've been to Eastwood, and it was a really worthwhile experience, if I may say, to visit both. But I want to ask about the Welsh women really in particular, and I'm very aware that the clock is running away with us a bit here today. But how do the experiences of Welsh women in prison compare to their male counterparts? And why is the self-harm figures so high in Eastwood, really? So can I start?
Yes, of course. Well, I think, as we said earlier, I think one of the challenges is the distance from home and the effect that has, and the thematic report that we talked about certainly is a factor, both in terms of being able to look after women, Welsh women who have ended up in English prisons better, but also to be able to make sure that those contacts are really maintained. And it isn't just family contact, it's also contact with community services as well. I think it's worth just adding in terms of self-harm that what we're seeing is a gap between the skills and capabilities and training of officers and the needs of the women. So it feels to me like there is a considerable gap there in many cases. What we're also seeing is the causes of self-harm are women being a long way from home, a sense that they're not in touch with their family, concerns about things like finance, benefit, debt that are going on back at their house, issues with not getting enough time out of their cells, and certainly we've been critical of Eastwood Park when it comes to time out of cell. And then I think staff having enough time to be able to interact with women. And what we find is they're so busy dealing with women who are in absolute crisis that other women who would really appreciate just some more day-to-day interaction, that relationship has become almost entirely transactional in many cases. And I think what that also means is that some of the women who aren't in crisis see that actually the way to get some attention is to begin to self-harm. So sadly, they're also pulled into self-harm like that as well. And finally, just time out of cell, the amount of activities, time in the fresh air that they get is also a big factor as well. So a number of things that go wrong. What's very interesting, actually, we inspected one of the prisons in Northern Ireland, Hydebank Wood, where it was very similar, which is a female prison, which has got a very similar sort of population to what you would find in Park. But actually levels of self-harm were much lower. Why was that? Very skillful staff team, very well-trained team, women with loads of purposeful activity, really good family ties, really good ties with local communities. So, look, lots of women who come into prison are already very vulnerable. Many of them have got drug addiction issues. Many of them are already prolific self-harmers before they come into prison. But where you get those factors right of fresh air, even opportunities to get things like clean clothes, which in women's prisons is not always available. The fact that women having to wear cut-down versions of men's clothes because there aren't enough clothes available. That in Eastwood Park, women not allowed to wash their underwear for some strange reason in the washing machine, and they were having to do it in their very small and meagre sinks. So all of those factors combined lead to some of the issues that we see with self-harm.
I just move the question on before you come in, because this, you know, do you think the Swansea residential unit has been talked about for a long time? Would you support that?
Well,
is that the way forward?
I was just going to say, I mean, this is slightly outside the remit of IMBs, but I visited Hope Street in Southampton, which is a residential unit. It's actually operated by the charity One Big Thing. I think the benefits of residential centres that are embedded within communities, that's something which needs to be looked at in far more detail than it currently is. And I would suggest, if you're planning on a future visit, go and visit Southampton, I would suggest, because it's really worth having a look around that and just kind of seeing, does that kind of then create the model for Swansea going forward?
We leave that with the chair, perhaps.
I suppose, yeah, that's yeah. In terms of the timing today, I'm afraid we've run out of time, so we're not going to be we've got a couple more questions about Welsh language and prison conditions, but if we will write to you about those particular incidents, if that's okay. But first of all, I'd like to say thank you very much for your time this afternoon, and I'm now going to bring this session to I'm going to suspend temporarily, so while we swap over panels, so order. Very much for our second panel, again for joining us in person this afternoon. I do need to highlight, obviously there are three members before us, and I need to highlight the fact that Terry McCarthy, National Executive Committee representative for North Wales Prison Officers Association, is unable to attend this afternoon, and it's not through any fault of his that he's not been able to. It's a train situation yet again. Anyway, we will proceed with the three witnesses we have in front of us, but thank you very much for all three of you for joining us this afternoon. And can I ask you, if I start left to right, if you could just briefly introduce yourselves and explain the role of your organisation in relation to the Welsh prisons. So I start with Hugh McDyer, please.
I'm Hugh McDyer. I'm a regional organiser for Unison with a lead in Wales for police probation and CAFCAS members.
Hi, I'm Sue McConnell. I'm an executive member of NAPO Cymru. That's the Welsh arm of NAPO, the professional association and union for probation officers.
Thank you very much. Gethin, please.
I'm Gethin Jones. I work as a prison offender manager in H&P Prescoed. I've worked in a number of Welsh prisons, and I represent Public and Commercial Services Union, who represent non-operational staff in prisons.
Thank you. And I should say that if we have any gaps, we will obviously write to Terry McCarthy separately if we need to. So thank you very much. Let me move straight on to Andrew Ranger.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for coming today. This is one to all of you. So what are the most significant challenges facing staff working in the prison and probation service in Wales? And if I'll go left to right as well, so starting with Hugh McDyer, please.
I think I would primarily speak in terms of probation, because that's where the majority of our membership are in relation to the service, and I guess the biggest significant challenge is workload, is the stress, I guess, that causes that. It's the inability, I guess, to recruit what's going out, so not retaining, not recruiting. And I think some of the other biggest challenges that are currently, sort of intrinsic with the system, and I guess I'd sort of go back a bit in terms of some of the pretty disastrous reforms that sort of split the probation service into privatised a good chunk of it and then left the rest in the civil service. And what we are finding, and all of our sort of survey membership information, all our sort of research and work that's done out there, that the civil service and the probation service is in some difficulty in terms of being able to deliver that sort of localised service. So particularly in Wales, where you would want to see, and you could easily see that being delivered in a much more localised service rather than top down. And I could give you all sorts of examples. I won't at this quite moment in time, but there are some real difficulties even down to implementing basic terms and conditions, where our members are having diktats from the civil service in terms of dealing with that. So. But at the moment, it's I guess the leaders in the probation service in Wales would probably admit they're asking way too much of their staff, and that's the sort of feedback we get from our membership.
Great, thank you very much. Sue McConnell, please.
Thank you. I'd echo much of that. This session is primarily focused on prisons. Prisons are very nearly full to capacity. Probation is already overflowing. And so I echo the point my colleague made about caseloads. And so that makes the work, it makes the work deeply stressful for staff. And in some senses quite chaotic. So some of that overflow is being dealt with by, so we had the prisons being nearly full, we had the SDS, so prisoners were released slightly earlier than they would have been previously. The implementation of that has been, members would say, in some cases really quite chaotic. So people were arriving, primarily men are arriving on release unexpected at probation offices with nowhere to live. So that has a rolling effect. In order to deal with the overflow in probation then has reset. So as the prisons are letting people out early, we just stopped probation service is stopping its active supervision of people on its books early. And that's a complete cut-off. So they're held, hypothetically, if you like, they're held on caseloads, but they're not being seen. And staff are finding that, and that's just a mathematical formula. So staff are finding that quite difficult to manage. To manage safely, but also to manage in a constructive way. So probation originally was was a social work founded organisation, frequently described as social workers to the courts. And professional, well-trained professional probation officers will hold a balance of public protection and rehabilitation in each hand, if you like, keep that in balance. But the service is now imbalanced because everyone is so busy trying to deal with just the public protection end of seeing people out of prison and trying to keep them out, that's being sort of thrown into imbalance.
Great, thank you very much. And Gethin Jones, please.
In the immediate foreground, it's the capacity crisis.
Wales has long been used as an overflow pipe for the rest of the system anyway, but we are under increasing pressure to take more prisoners from out of area and have our own capacity issues. On top of that, the early release schemes such as STS 40, HDC 365, which is coming in June, creates additional pressures on staff to process and manage. And it's like a never-ending conveyor belt. We know that we're going to release a load of prisoners early in June, but we're already talking about what the next emergency measures are going to be. And we don't know how much work that's going to be for us to do. So behind the immediate capacity crisis is a broader crisis in the criminal justice system. And for prison staff, that means pay, it means conditions, it means mental health, the way our sickness is managed. So there's two separate crises going on at the same time. There's the day-to-day running and getting things done and keeping the whole system running, and then there's the background structural problems, which go back to well over a decade of undermining of pay and conditions.
Okay, thank you very much. And you touched there on some of the differences between Wales and England. Are there more that those challenges, where those challenges differ, do you think?
You know, you asked the previous panel if Welsh prisons perform better, and I think we do. I think we're very good at what we do. If you meet prisoners in England, when they meet officers who are on detached duty, they say, oh, you must be from Welsh prison because you talk to us. You know, and we're very good. We're really proud that we've got 3s for safety in Cardiff and other good scoring. That's because they're good staff-run prisons. But yeah, we are in crisis. You know, day to day we are in big, big trouble. But we are holding our head a little bit higher than other people.
Sue, do you see the challenges as different in Wales and England, or are they?
The challenges, I think, are much the same experienced across England and Wales. It is notable that Wales, that the contributing to the prison overcrowding is the fact that the recall rate, recall of prisoners who've been released is higher in Wales. It's very high across the piece, England and Wales, but it is in fact higher in Wales, and I don't know why that is, other than if you don't have the scope to work constructively with people, if you can't plan someone's release and set things in place, then recall becomes more and more likely. And there's also the toll that this pressure is taking on staff in terms of their health and mental health is awful. Now, the ability of an organisation that exhausted and frightened and sick to not to take a balanced view about risk, I think is difficult. So there's a sort of turnaround where men primarily are released willy-nilly almost from the prison estate in a hurry. And that, I think, is inevitably leading into more rapid recalls because things aren't properly set in place. But it's pretty heartbreaking to see.
Thank you. And here, in terms of a difference in the challenges between England and Wales, is that noticeable, or is it pretty much the same across the board?
I mean, I would say it's pretty much the same. I think when we sort of engage with our membership in our sort of national infrastructure as unions and joint unions, I think broadly, you know, our members are struggling pretty much as Sue articulated, and for the reasons that have been articulated. And it's sort of been going on a while. And I think, you know, if there is to be a shift, then naturally, you know, to probation and to not custodial sentences, then clearly consideration of that resource and how you structure the delivery of the service in the best possible way to deliver for communities is also in the best interests of our membership as well, working there.
Yeah. Yeah. And just finally, do the current recruitment practices, are they equipping staff in prison and probation in Wales with the necessary skills to meet the challenges that you've just outlined, or do we need to see changes in those? And I'll start with you again this time.
Yeah, you know, from a Wales perspective, I think and again, I'll talk about probation, because obviously Gethin and Sue may have a better and a wider view than me on prisons. But I think they're doing their best and with what they can and how they can. I think, we do enjoy good trade union relations with our colleagues in probation in Wales, but there is that sort of top-down approach which you do find is quite restricting in many ways. In Wales in particular, where we could perhaps be looking at a devolved probation service, a devolved youth justice service. And I guess, we're aware that sort of commitments from the current government in the manifesto to do that. And I think, we're keen to develop that in any way we can. So I do think that we can make, we'd want to be making progress on that.
Yeah. And that is a question we'll come back to.
Yeah, sorry.
Given time. No, that's fine. Thank you very much. Sue McConnell, did you have anything to add on the recruitment side of things?
So recruitment, we're always told the troops are coming over the hill, but they never seem to quite land and stay. So recruitment is a problem, but so is retention. And the probation service has lost a huge, must be thousands of years of experience with people leaving the service, partly by retiring, partly by leaving early, because it's become so difficult. I would like to note, partly, I think, because we are from a union's point of view, probation is unwillingly linked up to tied to the prison service, and partly because of circumstances dealing with the immediate emergency that we have in terms of the prison population. People joining the service aren't staying for very long. I mean, a matter of years, a few years. And one of the reasons that a lot of members express, and I think research bears this out as well, is that people joining the probation service join because they want to do the things. They come with a set of values traditional to probation, that they want to work in a social work based way with people who are in trouble to help them lead better lives and in a supportive and constructive way. And that's the rehabilitation side of probation work. Partly, I think, because of being tied as a one-er, if you like, with the prison service, and partly because of the pressures the whole system is under, the work of the probation service. So I don't know if it's apocryphal. It was certainly widely believed. The motto of the probation service used to be advise, assist, befriend. And at that time, I remember it, the joke was that in America, and I don't know whether this is apocryphal or not, the unofficial motto of probation was surveil 'em, nail 'em and jail 'em. So it was very much an enforcement-led, punitive sort of extension of prison. And actually, surveil 'em, nail 'em and jail 'em does feel to a lot of new probation staff what they're being asked to do, because there is no scope or room for the reasons they join. So that becomes very demoralising.
Interesting, thank you. Mr Jones, anything to add on the recruitment challenges, particularly in Wales?
I know if the POA were here, they would tell you that 12 weeks is not adequate to recruit and train a prison officer. The entire focus now is just churn and burn. Just get as many people in as you can to try and fill the gaps, and it's like carrying a bucket with holes in it. For my members, often in administration roles, if you're in Swansea or Cardiff, there's other jobs out there. You're under an incredible amount of pressure, you're dealing with another early release scheme, and people just go. They go to other parts of the civil service, they go to other private ventures. It's very, very difficult to retain, and pay-wise, I think we've been made uncompetitive on the market.
Thank you very much. That's really interesting. Thank you, Chair.
Before we bring Anne Davies in, can I make a plea to the committee members as well as the witnesses for brief questions and brief answers, because we've got a lot we want to get in today and we do want to make sure we cover all aspects. Anne Davies, please.
Thank you. I'll start with you, Mr Jones, and I'll work across if you're willing. You mentioned already the pressure of overcapacity. So can you determine what functions need to be prioritised in the face of significant capacity pressures and increased workloads? And also, how confident are you that the measures introduced by the UK government will be able to address the challenges of the prison and probation service, the prison view and the probation service?
Okay, so the early release measures, each one's just a stopgap. It's just day to day. We already know that HDC 365 is not going to be enough, so we're going to have to think of something else. So they might get us through the next few months, but there's no long-term plan at the moment. At the moment, the UK government's focus is on 4.7 billion on private Titan prisons, and that is not what we need. We need investment in people, we need investment in staff in prisons and probation. And prisons have been in the press a bit now. We know things are bad. We're only in the paper when things are really bad for us. But I honestly think probation are in a worse position now. You know, I've got people who are lifers, IPPs, and it can change their officer 3 or 4 times. You never know where they're going to go or how it's going to happen. You know, that's why I'm glad I've got colleagues here from probation so they can tell you what it's like. We need the whole system to be functioning correctly. You know, the prisons can work with investment, but we need to have a probation service that can take people from us.
How we deal with the short term is causing us. We've got an emergency, and I've got no quick answers for that. However, I would invite this committee and policymakers to consider going upstream from the problem. If we go back to before the shambles that was transforming rehabilitation and the subsequent not very satisfactory reforms that followed that to probation, if you go back before that, probation's job was to be in the courts diverting people away from custodial sentences, and it did that very effectively and to no ill effect. If you go as close as Jersey Probation Service, you'll find the same thing is happening there. So Jersey probation officers are servants of the court, and they spend a lot of time nurturing that relationship, and they are effectively diverting people away from custody with no ill effect, if not a good effect. So I would really use up my little quick answer at this point to say, let's please go upstream and look at getting ahead of the game rather than reacting at the other end. Good.
Yeah, I mean, I would just echo those comments in relation to the probation service in Wales, and to say that, you know, it is about looking at the wider picture. So, you know, that there are sticking plasters, but they're only sticking plasters. They ain't going to last. There needs to be a proper strategy, and you need a genuine localised service to deliver it more effectively. Thanks.
Bill German, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the UK government has commissioned David Gauke to undertake the independent sentencing review. So I just wondered if it was down to you, what recommendations you'd like to see come out of that. Yes, thank you.
We've obviously responded as a trade union and to the independent sentencing review, and I think we've been very specific about what we want to see out of that. I mean, less custodial services, but then you need a proper plan in place for probation then, and you need the resources to follow that. And I think things like ending post-sentence supervision for those leaving prison after sentence of less than 12 months, some real practical responses in our response. I think looking at some of the how community sentencing works, so, you know, can that be more effective? Well, you know, our response is very clear that it can fines replace custodial sentences, and we mentioned some of the plights of women in prison, and I mean, you know, we firmly have the belief that a lot of those don't have to be custodial sentences. And, you know, while I'm at it, you know, they need to get on with building that centre in Swansea. So I think probation day reporting centres, I think they used to have them years ago, and they were very effective. And again, if resources followed that, and as Gethin has said, and Sue has said, you know, if there's a joined-up plan, which, you know, clearly there needs to be between sentencing, between prisons, between probation, then it can work. But it needs to be delivered then with you know, that local priority. Thank you.
Yes, I'd echo that. I would pray that we get rid of post-sentence supervision. That is trapping primarily quite immature young men in the revolving door of going in and out of custody. It's doing serious damage and also adding to the workload. So it's doing damage to individuals and increasing their likelihood of reoffending. So I would like to see PSS going. It's also bizarre that we have a sentence. We can enforce a recall to, effectively a recall to prison on someone who's finished their sentence, and that's just wrong. Ethically, it's wrong. So they've got to go. I'd make a plea for us to go upstream and put that accent on working with and near the courts. And I don't mean by some protocol, I mean getting really good probation officers into courts, making those connections and with the local community. And the other thing, and we submitted this to the Gork review, is to lose, if we could only lose the punitive rhetoric around sentencing. The best outcome would be, at the end of a community order or a supervision after prison, would be for the person in question to say, that was the best thing that ever happened to me, because they're socially invested, they've got a job and they've got a roof over their head. So I would really invite everyone to focus on what can be positively achieved. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll keep my answer really brief. We got some of the highest imprisonment rates in Western Europe in Wales. More non-custodial sentences would be really welcome, but who's going to manage them if probation can't manage the people we're releasing now?
Thank you. Yeah, that's really enlightening. Thank you.
Lake, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for coming along this afternoon. If I could start with Mr Jones this time and then work down the panel, if that's all right. I'm interested to hear your views in terms of how you see the relationship between UK and Welsh Government when it comes to the prison service and how it's operating day to day, and perhaps more specifically, you know, devolved public bodies versus those that are directly the responsibility of the UK government. And in particular, do you think that the relationship is working well? If not, are there ways that you think it could be improved upon within the current devolution settlement?
The lack of devolution of justice in Wales impacts the way the criminal justice system works in Wales every day to its detriment. So it affects me working in the prisons. As I said, we're effectively used as an overflow pipe for the English system instead of serving what we need to do in Wales. The Welsh Government could probably answer a little bit better about their relationships, but the last time we met with them, the Counsel General told us the Lord Chancellor hasn't spoken to them in 7 months after repeated requests to talk to them. And Welsh Government is providing the substance abuse support, it's providing the education support. In Bearing, it's giving Nova Cambria a lot of money, and we were concerned at one point that they were using some of that money from the Welsh Government for schemes in England. But because it's so murky and disjointed, the way justice works in Wales, we don't really know. So on the ground, it impacts, and you would have to ask the Welsh Government about their relationship.
Thank you, that's very, very useful. Ms McConnell.
Yeah, so it's referred to as the jagged edge, isn't it, between that sort of, yes, very difficult to navigate. Again, from staff on the ground, they just feel everything comes from the centre. That's the impression that everybody has. Certainly the contracts, so a probation officer will work with the person under their supervision with services, local services. Now those are all supplied, those are all done under contract, which is done at the centre, primarily to huge organisations. And I said this in the submission, I think, deliver line by line the terms of their contracts to very little effect at all. And so probation staff in Wales are compelled. They are required to use those services. So they refer to those services, and then they go down the road and refer to the person who they know works really well in their community, and that will depend on each community. So on that sense of central and devolution and relationships, I'd just like to say that all of the expert advice, and I mean that by the experts on the ground, but I also mean academics and the inspectorate, are all saying the same thing, which is that probation needs to be something very locally based, embedded in its communities, and that isn't happening. And in terms of relationship between the two governments, and I think I'd leave it for people higher than my pay grade to talk about actual arrangements for things, but it is notable that on the one side, on the Welsh side, the Welsh Government are talking actively about devolution and locality, but the instinct on the UK side seems to be very to centralise, and all the advice is to go the other way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Blair.
Thanks. I think we've been very frank about how we see that in our response to this inquiry. We have general concerns about the relationship between UK and Welsh Government across cabinet responsibilities. There does appear to be a lack of, I think we put respect in our response, but I would say in many cases a lack of understanding of what the issues are in Wales, respective to the local population and to the people working in probation and prisons in Wales. So we do think, I think we've been very frank about that. That's very evident, and if I may say that that's probably come to light in the last few weeks, perhaps a bit more illuminatingly. So I don't think that the specific needs and population considerations are fully considered at Westminster level.
Thank you. Thank you all three of you. And if I may very briefly, Chair, all of your organisations are on record as pushing for the devolution of probation, and I think it's very clear from all your answers that it would bring about an improvement to outcomes. Can I just also ask your views in terms of the devolution of youth justice as something also sometimes being discussed, and whether that would also be something you'd be supportive? If I could start with Mr McDyer this time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. For similar reasons, in terms, because operationally it'll improve things.
I mean, in terms of a localised service, in terms of how you support, how you manage that work, particularly for young people in communities who are having to go to court. So absolutely, that's, and often, a lot of our discussions with Senedd colleagues are very much around, perhaps the first step would be the devolution of youth justice. Yeah. Thank you.
Conor, same question.
Sadly, many people graduate from youth justice into adult justice, so clearly the obvious thing will be to keep the two joined up. And I should note that there's been some really excellent work done by the Welsh Centre for Crime and Social Justice and other colleagues on youth justice and about maturity, and the arguments for applying the same principles to people up to the age of 25. And so it would be great to see those two, that lesson being rolled into adult justice, if you like. And I believe that the youth, and we're talking about comparisons, I believe that youth justice in Wales has seen an absolute turnaround, the plummeting figures going into any sort of custodial state.
And Mr Jones.
The youth custody service in Wales has become more centralised. It's not. It's the opposite of being devolved. We're all expecting it to be the first step along with probation, but yeah, we would support it being devolved as well.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Anne Davis, please.
Thank you. Just a question to Mr Jones, really. Your organisation submitted really highlights concerns about the management of HMP Park and the call for the prison to be brought back into public ownership. I was just wondering if you could justify your position and explain how you would improve the outcomes really for Park Prison.
One of the reasons Park is in such crisis is because of the paying conditions for staff there. Because it's becoming the employer of last resort in the area, they're under increasing pressure to leave, like they do in all prisons. And that kind of accountability isn't there in the same way as it would be for a public prison. They're operating for profit, Park. They're not there to serve the community. They're not there to serve Wales. For a long time, it was stable. It had a very good leadership team that came from Cardiff Prison. Janet Walsgrove took a lot of really good administrators from Cardiff, and I think that kept a lid on it and kept things running relatively well for a while. But the state they're in now, it's very hard to know how anything other than a big structural change is going to pull it back up. We are having some advances. The POA have now in talks about recognition. For us, for a long time, Park has been a black hole because we've had no union recognition in there, not the POA, not PCS, no one. They get their own little company union, G4S. But it looks like they've now agreed to recognise POA, which is a big step forward for us. And we have to subsidise Park, in effect. Every time there's a crisis, the public prisons in Wales have to step in to help it. You know, they had a safety custody governor go in there from Swansea to help out because of all the deaths. It puts a drain on us. And we don't want to get to that point where we were with Birmingham in 2016, where a lot of Welsh prison officers had to put on helmets and grab their shields and go and retake that prison that G4S ran into the ground. So we're hoping it doesn't come to that. We think that, you know, there's some progress. We'd like Will Stiles to speak to the other unions as well. But yeah, we think public accountability and public funding would help.
Following on very briefly on that, doesn't sound to me as if you're going to be very confident really on how HMP Park's ability to increase, you know, the HMPPS want to increase the 345 extra inmates in there. Do you think that can be done safely?
I don't think it could be done safely now. And the larger prisons are, the harder they are to manage effectively, and the harder it is to get better outcomes. And Park is huge.
Now, with your obviously with your probation hat on, how do you feel about the increase of the 345 inmates coming into HMP Park?
I don't think I'm qualified to make a comment about Park. I would say just about this whole thing about increasing the prison capacity. Prisons are just like roads. If you build them, they just clog up and they fill up. So any approach to increasing prison capacity, we should be looking at I would hope that we'd look at the long term and say we might have to do this now, and maybe we will have to do this now, but let's look at let's plan a recovery position rather than just keep on this endless escalation of prison capacity and use.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add very, very quickly, I mean, we opposed it, the Group 4, and supported our trade union colleagues in the GUC in opposing any privatisation of prisons, and that ain't changed. I think the sooner you get them back in-house under proper control, not profit, then the better.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Llynos Medi, final question.
Yeah, diolch, thank you. I think you all touched a bit on this. It's about the Welsh language, but you've just said go upstream, have a relationship. Gethin, you said about prisoners, know you're from Wales because you talk to them, and I think you just mentioned locally based and embedded in your community. So the Welsh language, paramount if your first language Welsh, is that you're able to create that relationship, be it in prison or in probation. So how confident are you in the Welsh language provision in your services at the moment?
I'm happy to. I don't think I have a great deal of confidence in the provision of that, and I guess that for me looks at addressing the local needs and the needs of the population, and I don't think that's currently been addressed adequately. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, it's not my areas but expertise. I had the privilege to attend a nice Steadford in Usk Prison recently, which was absolutely joyous. But I understand, so there were men there learning Welsh and reciting and composing, and it was fabulous. This is, I think, staff generated. You know, so it's just something which emerges rather than something which is being led or that there's a real investment in. And I do know that we had, like my union in Wales, had a bit of a time just getting basic health and safety notices in Welsh into prisons. So like fire exit, these are quite important, hot water. So in terms of nourishing the Welsh language, I mean, this is just a basic requirement for people for whom that's their first language. So I don't think it's got a head of steam or is being led as an initiative, and that would be unsurprising from a centrally organised organisation.
The Welsh language scheme for HMPPS is meant to make an annual submission to the Welsh Language Commissioner. The only one I can find is from 2023. They might have made a submission in 24-25, but I can't find it. It's entirely dependent, in my experience, on individual members of staff. There's lots of members of staff who are really passionate about the Welsh language, and they've driven through a number of local initiatives. But strategically, it doesn't feel like there's anything there, except on paper.
Can I just come back?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
And do you agree with me that being able to speak your first language and creating that relationship, especially in probation, because you've just said that you're social work based, if you can't create that relationship, how are you going to get the best outcome? Do you agree with me that that is... Yeah. So, diolch.
Thank you. I suppose just one final question. In terms of where you come from within your particular area, within the prisons and probation, if you had your magic wand and you could fix one thing, what would it be? And if I start with Mr. Maguire, please.
I think if I had a magic wand, I'd want to fix a few things, but one thing, then I think we'd really, speaking from a membership point of view, we'd really just want to take that workload and stress off our members right now, because it's grim.
There's immediacy to that. Okay, yeah. Thank you very much, Ms. McConnell.
Yes, I'll have that one in the bag, and I'll add I'd want a commitment to a root and branch review of probation with a view to separating it from the prison, much as we respect our colleagues, separating it from the prison service as a standalone organisation in its own right.
That's very helpful. And Mr. Jones, I assume you're going to have those two in your bag as well. Anything else?
We need to be paid properly. Any pay settlement that is below inflation is a pay cut. Pay us properly and devolve justice to Wales.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all three of you for coming this afternoon. It's been really useful to have you here in person. Thank you so much, and I will now bring our session to a close. Order.